Thank you, Mr Howarth. It is, of course, always a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. Now, when I was elected 21 years ago, in 1997, our railways were still effectively publicly owned, and the reality was that the service was rubbish, and had been rubbish for a very long time. John Major, the then Prime Minister, having starved them of investment, privatised the railways in indecent haste. I think he thought it would be his legacy. Maybe it is. He did so just before he was forcefully expelled from office in the 1997 Labour landslide. The ensuing Labour government decided that there were more important priorities to deal with, particularly in health and education, than the renationalisation of the system. And the truth is that we wrongly assumed that as far as public transport was concerned, things could only get better. In fairness, there has been a significant investment into the system in the intervening years that has been paid for by rail travellers with increased fares and increased numbers of passengers. Now, I'm certainly not in favour of returning to the failed services that were delivered by British Rail in the 1990s, and I don't believe that anybody else is. But the fact is that the present system is broken and was unfit for purpose from its very onset. The truth of that is clearly demonstrated today and every day in Greater Manchester and the North by witnessing the delivery of rail services by Northern Rail. Northern, of course, is the trading name of Arriva Rail North. They began their franchise in April 2016, and providing they don't walk away, we could suffer them until 2025. Arriva Rail North has been a disaster from day one. They have been in free fall ever since, and they do not deserve to be entrusted with the franchise for another day. The Northern franchise is one of the largest in the UK, currently providing more than 16,000 train services to a population of 15 million people. In Greater Manchester, they call it 97 stations. A huge number of people use these stations every day and depend on the service to go to work and education, as well as the enjoyment of their social and family life. According to the Office of Road and Rail estimates of station usage, there were nearly 81 million passenger entries and exits from Greater Manchester stations in the year 2016-17. The quality of these services is essential to the lives of thousands of families and has an enormous effect on the economy of the North. It is a very big deal, and we must not allow the political argument that revolves around our transport deficiencies to descend simply into one of the government automatically supporting all private transport providers and the opposition automatically attacking them all. But regardless of your view regarding nationalisation or privatisation, Northern Rail is failing. When they were first awarded the franchise, they promised over 2,000 more trains each week, with more frequent earlier and later trains offering passengers greater choice. They promised a 37% increase in peak time capacity. They promised 281 new carriages, plus the full refurbishment of the remaining fleet and the removal of all Pacer trains within 3 years. Yet, according to the Office of Road and Rail, since the start of 2017, punctuality of Northern Rail services in Greater Manchester and Liverpool has plummeted from 90% to 83%. They must be compelled to do much better. And it seems to me that the issue of fair compensation is central to improving their performance. If we are to remain with a privatised service, then its franchisees must be answerable to passengers, and as the situation stands, they are not. As you would expect with an operation focused on profit, they do little to encourage passengers to claim compensation. The Consumer Rights Organisation, Which magazine, calls for improvements in the delivery of compensation. Their research found that only a third of passengers who may have been entitled to compensation actually made a claim. The two main reasons for failing to claim was, firstly, it is too complex, and secondly, there is a lack of information about the claims process. The consumer organisation found this unsurprising, as the way that train companies award compensation widely varies right across the country. They report that train companies can take up to 20 days to respond to claims, with 1 in 4 people needing to prompt the train company about their claim. As far as Northern are concerned, their compensation scheme even excludes people with multimodal tickets, despite ministerial statements saying that they must include them. And passengers are left waiting for as much as 4 months for a response to their refund applications. Over the last 2 months, things have gone from extremely bad to even worse. All of this, of course, adds up to Northern's record before the unbelievable timetable transfer. And when things go wrong at Northern, and things are certainly going wrong, then the whole of Greater Manchester is in danger of grinding to a halt, because the road alternatives are often close to gridlock. The major problem at the moment is that Northern simply don't employ enough drivers to allow for flexibility. Their model is dependent on drivers working on their rest day. And to make matters worse, the company clearly has industrial relations problems, and there's been no rest day working agreement since February. They blame industrial action for their poor performance, but when the government privatised the system in 1997, they privatised their industrial relations as well. And it's just not acceptable to blame the trade unions and no one else because the company must be accountable for disputes with their employees. They must manage their industrial relations. That is their job, not anyone else's job. The sad reality, however, is that most of their employees despise their employer about as much as most of their passengers do. Now, in fairness, and this is the only fairness, their operational problems have certainly been made very much worse by delays to the electrification of the Blackpool to Preston line by Network Rail. And before trains can operate on new lines, drivers have had to undergo safety training. But Northern's lack of planning has meant that from the 16th of April, drivers were pulled away from scheduled services across the network to undergo training. Everyday services were cancelled, leaving passengers stranded at stations whilst on their way to work. Northern knew well in advance that the combination of these problems would leave them short of drivers needed to operate the timetable. This was in no way a problem that should have taken them by surprise, and yet it has gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Sources tell me that on the 16th of May, a full month after the issues with driver training began and before the timetable fiasco, there were 91 trains fully cancelled, 140 part cancelled, and 48 trains with reduced carriages. Every day is the same. And yet Northern bury their heads in the sand and act surprised by their driver shortage. Now, I've repeatedly asked Why is there no strategy in place? Why was there no set schedule for cancellations so that passengers would know what to expect? Why were there no rail replacement bus services? Northern have provided no explanations for their failures. The restatement that cancellations are due to driver shortages as an explanation is simply not good enough. And neither is the promise that by 2020 things will improve. They remind me very much, I'm sad to say, of the Secretary of State who just keeps repeating the mantra, it's not our fault and things will get better. But ordinary, hard-working people's jobs are at risk here. Family livelihoods depend on the ability to get to work on time. And yet Northern, along with the Secretary of State, have taken no action and have just looked the other way. Now, if my constituents were to apologise to their employers for being late for work every day, whilst assuring their bosses that by 2020 their timekeeping will improve, then they'll be out of a job long, long before 2020, and so should the Northern Rail franchise. Unbelievably, when the new timetable began on the 21st of May, things got very much worse. Northern admitted that 90% of the new schedule was different to the old one, and this was clearly a major change. Services along what is an already overcrowded corridor were greatly reduced. Now, with the long-term experience of this operator, commuters in my constituency were braced for a difficult experience that day, but they still expected trains to arrive. What they got was chaos, because right across Greater Manchester, passengers were left stranded on platforms with no train and no information. Now, I'm told that on the first Monday of the new timetable, there were 196 cancelled services and 131 part cancelled services across the Northern network. 42 of these cancelled services were due to stop in Bolton. Just over a week later, on the 29th of May, the number of cancellations had risen to 254, and as of 7:30 this morning, there were 50 cancellations with 43 trains part cancelled. Is it any wonder that my constituents are striving to pass their driving test and buy a car to block up even more of our overcrowded roads? These are people who just want to go out and do a hard day's work, and it is our responsibility, government's responsibility, to help them and to encourage more travellers to get on the train. The week before the new timetable was introduced, passengers were being told by train guards that the new work schedule for drivers was not and would not be completed in time. Passengers expected chaos. Train guards expected chaos. Only the Secretary of State and his so-called experts were in the dark. Drivers were expected to turn up for work on the 21st of May as though nothing had changed, even though 90% of services have been changed in the new timetable. Now, when Northern said that the services were cancelled because of staffing issues, what they should have said was that services were cancelled because of management issues and their own incompetence. If they were as good at running trains as they are at making excuses, then we would have nothing to complain about today, Mr Howarth, and we wouldn't be bothering you with this debate. The fact is that they failed to properly plan for the biggest timetable change in years. And these are problems of Northern's own making, and they far too often leave Greater Manchester without the basic train service that we are entitled to. Passengers don't really want to know about new ticket machines and Wi-Fi on the train. They just want to go to the station and catch a train that will be on time with a seat to sit down on. Now, one of my constituents texted me to say that she was stood in the toilet of a packed train with 3 other people she didn't know. Now, let me tell you, Minister, you can't use Wi-Fi in these circumstances. So you can understand my passengers' concern. Now, I quite frequently say in Bolton, we have an excellent train line that runs right through my constituency. It's potentially a great service. All we want is some trains with enough carriages on it. It's not rocket science, is it? When a peak hour 2-carriage train, instead of the promised 4 carriages, arrives at Bromley Cross Station in my constituency, there's an audible groan that runs right down the platform because they expect to fight to get on the train.
Will the honourable gentleman give way?
Yes, of course I'll give way.
And would you also, I thank the honourable gentleman way, would you also accept that that train then comes into Bolton train station, which is in my constituency, and by that time there's no space for anyone to get onto the train?
Well, that's right, because nobody's getting off in Bolton. They're going to Manchester. So all down the line, people are getting on the train. The closer you are to Manchester, the less the chance you have of getting on the train at all. So 4-carriage trains are absolutely essential. Nothing to do with the timetable issues. Promises have been repeatedly broken on the delivery of extra carriages by Secretaries of State, by the Prime Minister who visited Bolton prior to the 2015 election. Well, not this Prime Minister, a previous Prime Minister who's long gone down the line. We are fed up with the daily struggle to catch a train. Now, if you're a seriously disabled passenger who wants to travel to work in Manchester from Bolton, then you might as well give up your job. Because catching a train at the peak period in Bolton is a rugby scrum, and you will need to be 100% fit to succeed. It's a disgrace. There's no room for prams, there's no room for bikes, and it is absolutely impossible for anyone with mobility issues. In this country, in the 21st century, it is completely unacceptable, and Northern Rail must accept their responsibility and be called to account by the Secretary of State. Bolton has suffered disproportionately from a terrible service over many years, and our experience is a result of the problems that continue within the existing system. The division of responsibility between different rail companies, Network Rail, rolling stock leasing companies and the government has allowed them all to blame each other for the failures. Failures that passengers end up paying for, sometimes with their jobs. What's wrong with this privatisation model is that passengers can't vote with their feet and use another provider, and too many train operators know it. If publicly owned monopolies are unsuitable, then privately owned monopolies are very much worse. But the ultimate responsibility must lie with the Secretary of State for Transport for this catalogue of failures. If not, then what's the point in a Secretary of State for Transport? Now, I very much doubt that he will, but if he doesn't sort out these problems in the short, medium and long term, there is certainly no point in this Secretary of State for Transport, and he should clear his desk along with the Northern Rail franchise.